So this is me. This is kind of how I've defined myself more recently. I feel that I'm a hybrid in terms of kind of the design skill sets that I have, but also a hybrid as a human being. I class myself as an optimist more than anything. If you have the opportunity of questions or comments, either today or in the future, be sure to hit me up on Twitter or my company, Teague, 1926. So first off, I just wanted to kind of speak about how I came to being on this stage in front of you all this evening. And that started with this man here, Dave, and he gave me a call. And he was like, "Hi, I'm Dave." I was like, "Okay, Dave, don't know you. This is interesting." And he's like, "We saw that great bike you guys did." At which point I was like, "Cool, appreciate that. Very exciting. Some random bloke called Dave has found my bike. Very fun." At which point he then said, "I would love to speak at Cusp." At which point I was like, "Say what?" Absolutely petrified. So, after kind of the nerves came down and I realized I was still on the phone with Dave, I decided to continue the conversation. "Well, what do you want me to speak about?" At which point Dave was like, "Design. Seems easy enough. I'm a designer, should be able to handle that." So I was like, "Okay, is that it?" And he was like, "Yep, that's pretty much it. Just talk about design. Just don't be boring." So no pressure then. So, what is it that I want to talk about in terms of design? Well, I thought, as a designer, I would talk about 7 things I think designers should do, and I would do that by showing the impact that it had on the bike that Dave likes so much. So, at first point, this is Simon Cowell, an incredible man from Britain, my motherland. He is probably the world's best at this first thing that all designers should do, even though he's not a designer. That thing is to crave talent. This man knows more than anyone that he wouldn't be as successful if he didn't have the talent that he's surrounded himself with. And that's very much the same for design. Design does not happen in a vacuum. It's very important that us as individuals crave talent and we surround ourselves with talent. So specifically for the bike, what that meant is this was a competition born out of talent in a non-profit out of Portland, Oregon, called the Oregon Manifest. It's set up a non-profit about bicycles, set up this competition called the Bike Design Project, appropriately titled, and they hand-selected the best talent they could find from these 5 cities, Chicago being one of them. The famous design firm Minimal, run by Scott Wilson, was part of this competition. And they knew that to have a successful competition, to bring kind of the heat that they needed to this competition, they needed to attract the best talent, which they did by hand-picking it. From there, it was kind of my job to make sure Teague, as the design firm that was in it, had the best talent. Oregon Manifest had done a great job of pairing each design firm with a bike maker, but it was our job to kind of choose the right team for that. And I chose these 6 guys here from very different places originally, but as one family now in Seattle. Clement came from France originally, kind of has that Gallic French flair to his styling that we appreciated. John Mabry and Taylor, American, kind of brought that maker mentality to it. Michael Charles from Holland had a mechanical engineering kind of tilt to his thinking. Kay is kind of a true poet. She's from Korea. Ollie is kind of our hipster German who brings kind of that logical, rational sensitivity that we expect from Germans. The A-team, if you will. So that brings me to my second point. Once you've kind of crafted that talent, what's the next step? And the next step, for me at least, is to know the why. And I think Tesla is a great example. Tesla was by no means the first electric car to come to market, but it is clearly the most successful that's come to market. And it's because deep down they knew the why, and it wasn't that they were about to embark on kind of this gimmick of an electric car. They understood that first and foremost it needed to be a car first. And as we see, they understood the principles of making a car, and that is to make something fast and make something sexy. And that's why they had the success that they did over kind of the original electric cars that we've seen. So Oregon Manifest, they gave us the what. They told us to design the ultimate urban utility bike. But for us, we needed to understand why we should do that. And for us, coming from Seattle and the kind of the traffic that we had, our goal was to get less drivers and more cyclists. And to do that, you have to understand why people drive. Driving is not always a great thing, especially in that daily commute downtown. Why would someone subject themselves to this if there were other transport options? And it's a case of trade-offs. She was prepared to kind of put up with certain things because there were certain trade-offs that were on the positive end of driving. And that brings me to my third point. Whenever you design anything, you have to have empathy. And empathy really begins with understanding the context. And us, in this competition specifically, each of the 5 design firms had to design a bike for their city. So our brief was to design the ultimate urban utility bike for Seattle. And if anyone is aware of Seattle, it is constantly referred to as being a wet place. But with wet comes clouds. Clouds cover sun, also makes for a very dark place as well in Seattle. It's also hilly, impossibly hilly. These 2 on bikes here are not normal human beings. That is quite ridiculous. And you'll see that there's not many other cyclists about. There's far more cars than there are cyclists, and that's because the hills in Seattle are a real thing, and so we have to deal with that. It's also really diverse. Seattle is kind of unique in its kind of makeup in that it's surrounded by water. It's also a very compact city. And so there's a lot of diversity that comes with that, a lot of different types of neighborhoods and makeups, and we had to account for that as well. But it can also be a very bike-friendly city. If you ever kind of embrace the idea of cycling, Seattle does have bike racks on the front of their buses. They also have these incredible bike trails that take you way out of downtown, but they do kind of originate downtown. So within 5 to 10 minutes of cycling in Seattle, you can kind of be on these beautiful trails going around the lakes in Seattle. But what all that means in terms of that context and understanding the individuals is that you have to be incredibly committed to cycle in Seattle. This is a prime example of someone that chooses to bike on their daily commute. You have to kind of have the right weather gear, you have all the lights, you have special kind of storage and baggage. You have to be either incredibly committed in Seattle to ride a bike, or you have to be naked. This happens every year around the summer solstice in one of the suburbs of Seattle. The body paint is optional. Not everyone chooses to have it. I'm not quite sure why people would do such a thing. So, at this point, we have got great talent. We've craved talent. We have understood what and why we're trying to achieve with the design of the bike. And we've gathered a ton of context. We have empathy for the individual that we're designing for. And that gets us to the core of what kind of design is, and that's about making beautiful things. Not just physically, but functionally beautiful as well. With that, we understood and kind of looked into why people are driving. And basically, people were driving for 3 reasons. The first being safety, the second being security, and the third being convenience. And inversely, this is kind of the reasons people are not choosing to cycle in a downtown kind of commute. They are concerned about their safety on the bike, especially when they're on the roads with other much larger, faster vehicles. They're concerned about the security. They're concerned that their bike is still going to be there when they get to the end of the day. And as we saw in terms of the kind of the geography and the makeup of Seattle, convenience is a huge component. Hills, the wet, and all of that. So I'd like to share a quick video. This is kind of the final asset that we produced for the competition. It shows the bike, and it starts to show how those 3 points kind of manifested across the design of the bike. So I just want to kind of highlight how some of those features manifested back to those initial pillars. So in terms of safety, what we did was we included a number of kind of features that we take for granted in the cars that were providing kind of those safety cues for a lot of people. So we introduced daylight running lights. This is something that bikes typically had never had up until this point. So as you start cycling on the bike, the motion of the bike activates the lights and they start running, and then they only switch off after kind of a couple of minutes of inactivity. With those lights, there's an ambient light sensor as well. So as the day kind of draws to night and it gets darker, the lights get brighter. We also included turn signals, which are activated just on the handlebars by a simple press, and the brake lights that are activated simply by pulling back on the brake. So we're adding a lot of those visual kind of cues from other vehicles, so other vehicles on the road are able to anticipate what that cyclist is doing in terms of slowing down, turning, and things like that. One of the nicer features and one of the key features for safety, as we spoke about in terms of how dark Seattle is, it was really important to kind of increase the visual footprint of the bike. Obviously, we didn't want to make the bike bigger because it was about being nimble and downtown, but we wanted to increase the visual footprint. So as you ride this at night, there's strips of LEDs kind of underneath this front basket that kind of wash down onto the tarmac, and it creates kind of this visual barrier as you're cycling along so that cars and other pedestrians on the streets get to see you more clearly. In terms of security, as you saw in the video, we understood the need for a serious lock when you're locking this up downtown. And what we decided was we have to get this integrated into the bike in some way. And we went through a number of different iterations as you do in the design process, but we ended up on kind of this handlebar locking system. One of the nice advantages of the removable handlebar is that it acts as a visual deterrent as well. So once you've secured the bike by removing the handlebars, you now have this visual deterrent of there being no handlebars on the bike. So if you choose to kind of hack your way through this handlebar, you've actually got rid of the handlebar that you would need to ride the bike that you've just stolen. But we know not every stop is for a long period, and so we didn't want kind of that hassle. We didn't want to create problems by creating a new solution. Often, in terms of design, we don't anticipate the new problems that our new solutions have created. And one of those was kind of that time and the fact that there was no handlebars. If you wanted to kind of quickly get on your bike and leave, you couldn't do it. And so we kind of had this quick stop method that you saw in the video where you simply slide out the handlebar, snap it around a pole, and lock it in. And that's great for kind of the obligatory coffee run that you have to do in Seattle. So this front storage system was another thing, and that gets kind of that diversity of Seattle. We wanted a very versatile bike. We didn't want people having to think about what they might do that day. We wanted them to just be able to get on the bike and go. So that's why the lights are integrated, the locks are integrated. You don't have to think about accessories that you need to take with your bike. That's why the storage is fully integrated into the frame, and it's a flexible system. So whether it's coffees, whether it's your laptop bag, it all fits onto this shelf. And then finally, kind of that key convenience component, what we added to the bike was an electric pedal assist. So even though this looks like a daunting hill, which it certainly is without the e-assist, this actually, when you ride this bike, it just feels like you're riding on the flat, which is a pretty cool sensation. And one of the other aspects that we also added was automatic gear shifting. So we were trying to kind of lower the barrier of entry to cycling. So we're getting rid of some of the kind of the fears and the complications that people might have had with cycling in the city. And that brings me to a very important part of kind of the design process, and that is you have to find your happy. This was a 7-month program. Even though we were kind of designing for ourselves, we didn't directly have a client like we typically do in the day-to-day work, there's still no such thing as a perfect project, and you still need to find moments of happiness as you go through any project. And that differs for any individual. So for John, it meant testing. Testing made John happy. This is an early prototype where we were looking at adding proximity sensors to the back of the bike, so as cars came closer by, you would kind of get a vibration and light feedback to know that there was cars coming up behind, kind of looking at those safety components again. And what we found was that we were really wanting to kind of get this stereo effect, so I either knew whether it was something coming down the right-hand side of me or the left-hand side. And what we found was that to have a vibration strong enough that you would actually feel while you're riding on a bike that's shaking as you're going, it would actually just vibrate the whole bike. So you didn't get a sense of stereo. And so this wasn't actually something that made it to the final design, but it's kind of that point that was made earlier. It's still important to test and prove out these concepts, even if they don't make it to the final thing. Sharing made Clem happy. He's someone that can just create forever. He seems to have an endless amount of ideas, and sharing those ideas is critical to him. And so these opportunities to kind of place all the various concepts up on the board and really share and critique and be passionate about kind of the ideas you're coming up with is what makes Clem happy. It could be simpler though. Any kind of designer in the traditional sense is always at home when they bring out their moleskin and are able to just start sketching. And that was the case for Ollie. Tailor welding, that made everyone happy. I think it's probably the same point for the bike before, when you actually get to start manufacturing it and the ideas are coming off the paper, they're coming off the screen and into a real frame. That was an incredible moment. So tailor welding made everyone happy. But it doesn't always have to be these big moments. I think it's important to understand that food can make you happy, and donuts. Just taking kind of a 5-minute break from kind of the hustle and bustle of design and just saying, let's just pause, let's just go and get some donuts, we'll be fine, come back and go at it again. And that brings me to my next point, and that is enjoying the ride. This is about enjoying the process. As a sports fan, not a Browns fan, but as a recent Seahawks fan who had a similar problem where we had never won anything, this is a challenge for any sports fan that they seem to understand maybe better than anyone else, in that it's always going to be ups and downs. You don't get to win every game, and that's the same for design. You don't get to win on every project you're doing, so it's important to embrace kind of the turbulence, as we heard this morning, and kind of almost enjoy that a little bit and understand that it's just the process we go through, and you have to enjoy that. Unfortunately, for the team on this project, we lost sight of that at times. And we did have too many late nights. We kind of procrastinated a little bit too much on kind of the ideating, and when it came to the actual making, we were kind of short on time, so it really crunched us. So a lot of the guys did incredible late nights, working through days and nights to kind of get the bike there for the deadline. We also used far too many get-out-of-jail cards. As with any process, and as I spoke about earlier, the need to bring in other talent, we used up a lot of these on people, external people, and also people within the company at Teague, kind of saving our asses by either painting the frame at the very last second or whatever it is. Too many whys at not working. I think anytime, and design you have this quite a bit, anytime you're trying to create something that's not been created before, you definitely have these moments of why is it not working, and that can very much be the case with technology, which is kind of one of our major tools now for design. The key point of that is that if you don't enjoy the ride, if you don't anticipate the process and the ups and downs that you have, it can actually be really hard to celebrate the wins that you do get. And this was actually kind of one of the saddest points of this process and this program in particular, in that we were successful on many fronts. That video that you saw got over 2 million views. It was watched in over 150 countries. We got some incredible press from a lot of the websites that we kind of awe at and look at every single day, and yet because the process, because those late nights, because the team chemistry had got challenged because of that, we weren't able to really celebrate that as a team. So it's kind of a cautionary tale. We should have been really able to high-five each other and celebrate, but it was challenging because kind of the project itself had taken its toll. And that brings me to my final point, and that is to remember to laugh. This is critical. All of these points come to fruition in that being a designer is very much a blessing for me personally, and we've seen many forms of design. I'm not merely talking about the traditional sense of design, but when we think about anyone that has the ability to create things that haven't created before, it's a huge blessing to be in that position. This is a famous person that once said this. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. That's a friend of mine, Jesus. For a more contemporary version, Uncle Ben from Spider-Man kind of cleaned it up for us a little bit. With great power comes great responsibility. And truly, I do believe like being a designer is having a superpower. It's an incredible gift that we have. This is something that I've been fortunate to kind of live and breathe daily. This is the mission statement from the company that I work for at Teague, build a new and better world. I think that's an incredible statement. I think it really does say the power that design has, the responsibility that we have as individuals with that gift. And this was a statement that was given to us a long time ago, because we were founded in 1926, but this is the founder, Walter Doran Teague, and he said this in a book that he wrote in 1940. For the first time in history, the possibility of a good life for all men is conditional only by our own discretion and intelligence in ordering our affairs, our energy and acumen utilizing the tools we possess, and our goodwill in defining our objectives. This is the job of design. That's a powerful statement for someone to say in 1940. Walter Doran Teague was kind of one of the grandfathers of industrial design when he founded this company in 1926 in his 40s. And he created that book. That book is titled Design This Day. And that's really kind of my closing point here. Today is now our opportunity. Let's not wait for tomorrow. Let's not wait for new tools to exist. We have incredible tools now. We have incredible, talented people. We've seen Trisha this morning at age 14 learning to code. There are incredible tools. Today is our opportunity, so let's design this day. Let's remember to laugh.